Attachment theory is not a tool that you should be using to get your ex back. It is a tool that you should be using to understand yourself better and get yourself back. And the truth is, once you've actually taken steps towards finding yourself and getting yourself back and reconnecting with yourself, chances are you're not going to want your ex back anyway. Because once you've worked on your attachment injuries and start to lean a little bit more secure, you are more readily able to identify who is and isn't emotionally safe. And if your ex hasn't been doing anything to work on their side of the street, even when they do swing back around, you're likely not going to be on the same emotional wavelength. So you're not probably going to be that interested in reconnecting with them anyway, which is a good thing. So this shift will actually help you make space for the healthy, emotionally safe relationships that you are seeking. Now, what we're going to be covering in today's episode is a little bit of an exploration of the nuance and differences between secure and insecure attachment. So what that really looks like, and also layering in the difference between regulated and a dysregulated nervous system, which often is what drives our insecure attachment. And I'm going to throw in a little bit of the brain science behind it to hopefully help you understand what's going on a little bit better. And I also want to cover off and do a little bit of an exploration about how attachment theory is often misused by these predatory dating coaches, where they're selling you this glow-up trap and the illusion of pseudo-control. And essentially they're setting you up for deeper wounds that will potentially get activated and reopened if and when your ex does circle back around. And why this is important to understand is when we are outsourcing our emotional regulation, it keeps us stuck, it delays healing, and it doesn't allow it to happen. So if you have a reunion with your ex and neither of you have made any progress towards becoming more secure, it's not growth, it is literally just recycling of emotions and potentially trauma recycling. Welcome back to the Reconnection Co, where healing starts with reconnection. Now, the usual disclaimer before we dive in, whilst I am a registered health professional, I am not a mental health professional yet. Yes, I am undertaking accredited studies in counselling and mental health, but all of the information that I share here and across all of the Reconnection Co platforms isn't therapy or individual advice. Yes, it's grounded in evidence and lived experience, but none of this is designed to be taken or delivered as mental health advice. So if today's episode speaks to you, there will also be a guided journaling practice session that is linked in the show notes that you can access via the YouTube playlist. Most people discover attachment theory off the back of heartbreak. You're desperate for answers, and suddenly you find this entire industry promising, follow these steps and your ex will come running back. But here's the truth. It is a complete misuse and bastardization of attachment theory. It is doing nothing more than preying on your distress and feeding you advice that short term gives you some sense of relief because you feel in some sense of control, but long term, it more often than not, all it does is simply delay your healing and can further entrench or lead to the development of a number of codependent behaviors that will set you up for more relational pain time and time again. Now, attachment theory was never meant to be a manual for manipulating someone else's behavior. Where it can be best used in breakup situations or even in other relational dynamics where you feel that you may not be getting back what you're putting in, or you're constantly dreading that family event that you have to go to, even though you know that you'll feel worse for the experience. And you're often fully aware of what's going to suck about that family event, and you're more than aware of probably how you're going to feel during and after the event. But you'll dismiss your own distress away with but they're family. So attachment and relational blueprints are 100% playing themselves out in these situations as well. It's not always just our romantic relationships. So attachment theory, when it's being used to serve you and your healing, it will guide you towards understanding your own patterns so that you can heal, so you can identify your relational blind spots, build some boundaries, and overall just connect better with yourself. But when it's used as a strategy to win back someone who is emotionally unsafe, it doesn't bring security. It just keeps you stuck. Okay, so what does it look like when our attachment wounds are completely set on fire off the back of a breakup? It's important for us to recognize that breakups don't just hurt emotionally, they impact your entire body. There are a number of very common emotions, physiological responses, and thought loops that play out. But how long and how loud they play out for, it does depend on a number of factors. Firstly, how your breakup unfolded. Was it a relatively amicable breakup? Was there a lead-in that you could see it likely coming, or was it a complete blindside? Secondly, the dynamic of your relationship when it was intact. And I use the term intact very loosely because if we're kicking around in a trauma bond, the relationship wasn't intact at all. It was on self-abandonment driven life support. Lastly, your past traumas, your past relationships, your unhealed wounds will all drive the responses. So some of the very common emotions that we'll feel off the back of a breakup, waves of grief and sadness that will often feel bottomless and never ending. Anxiety, panic, or dread about the future that you feel like you've lost. There's also anger at your ex, anger at yourself or at the whole situation. And then you can also experience numbness or flatness, or what's referred to as anhedonia, like you can't feel anything. And then physiologically, some of the really common responses that people report: trouble sleeping, waking up anxiously at 3 a.m. and not being able to get back to sleep. Loss of appetite, or going to the other extreme, comfort eating. Tightness in the stomach, nausea, headaches, tightness in the chest, restlessness where you can't sit still, or the opposite, a total crash out and you're exhausted, complete fatigue. Now, some of the very common thoughts and narratives that will play out off the back of a breakup, things like, I'll never find someone like them again, which, well, to be honest, that might be a good thing. Some of the other things that will ruminate through people's heads: what did I do wrong? Yes, we can all improve. No one is perfect. But if you've been hit with an abrupt breakup from someone with a moderate to severe avoidant attachment style, there is a high probability that you didn't do much wrong at all. And one of the other common questions that people will just punish themselves over is, if I just had said or did something differently, would it have changed the outcome? Probably not. The destination will very likely have ended up being the same. You may have just been kicking the can down the road a little bit. So stop and pause on that. Think about the things that you likely feel that you could or should have done differently. I would very much hazard a guess that each of them will tend to have some flavour of self-abandonment, boundary folding, or something along those lines. And this is one of the thoughts that those predatory breakup muppets selling you false hope love to prey on. Now, some of the other common thoughts and themes that'll play out for people is, or maybe they'll realise how good of a partner I am and they'll come back. Yeah, maybe they will, but maybe they won't. But it's a maybe that you have no control over. And if you listen to that statement, what that statement is saying, it's your wounded inner child wanting to be seen. But what you need to remember is you're there. You can see them, as in your wounded inner child. You can love your inner child. A huge part of healing is connecting with our wounded inner child and reparenting our wounded inner child. So reparenting our inner child means learning to give ourselves now the care, safety, and validation that we may not have consistently received when we were a child. So when you were young, or when we were young, we rely on our caregivers to regulate our nervous systems. They teach us self-worth and they model what love looks like. So if those needs aren't met through neglect, inconsistency, or even well-meaning but emotionally unavailable parenting, your attachment system develops around those gaps. So that forms your relational blueprint. So then fast forward into adulthood, and these same unmet needs show up as triggers in relationships. So you might panic if someone pulls away. That's an abandonment wound. Feel too much for needing closeness. That's a shame wound. Shut down when conflict arises. That's an avoidance strategy. So reparenting is the process of noticing those younger parts of you when they're activated and responding in a way that you wish a safe parent had. So circling back to our emotions, thoughts, and physiology off the back of a breakup, here's why much of it is playing out. So firstly, we have our attachment system activation. Your brain perceives separation as danger, just like a child crying when a caregiver leaves. Your alarm system goes off and your system goes into panic. Then we have our neurochemistry crash. During a relationship, oxytocin and dopamine bonded you to your ex. After the breakup, your brain experiences withdrawal. It is like coming off a drug. It is actually like coming off a drug. The neurophysiology is quite similar. And then you will also enter a pattern of nervous system dysregulation. So this is where your main source of co-regulation is gone, that is your ex. So your body will swing between hyperarousal anxiety, racing thoughts, increased heart rate, and collapse, fatigue, tiredness, numbness. And another thing that will often play out, and this is where we can really get stuck in processing and moving past a breakup, is when cognitive dissonance comes to town. So your mind can really struggle to hold the reality of like it's over alongside the hope of, oh, well, maybe it's not. And this mental tug of war can very much fuel obsessive thinking. And then if you layer ADHD on top of that as well, that goes on steroids. And one of the other huge things that happens off the back of a breakup, especially an abrupt breakup that we maybe weren't expecting or was quite traumatic in how it unfolded, is our self-worth wounds can just get ripped open or created. So if the rejection hits at old insecurities that you may have, every thought feels like proof that you weren't enough. Now enter these predatory fuckheads who prey on this dysregulated, hurting, vulnerable version of yourself. And you would have heard so many of these statements before. Stop chasing them. By you stopping the chase, it will trigger pattern interruption with them and that'll start making them miss you. Yeah, maybe it will. But if it's just pattern interruption and you removing yourself as a validation source for them, be very, very careful if they do circle back, because it's more commonly about them seeking regulation from you, not seeking reconnection with you. Now, another flavor of this BS is that go and glow. Work on yourself, glow up, let them see that you've moved on. Yeah, on the surface it sounds empowering, but look closer. It is still performance. You're not glowing up for yourself. You're glowing up to be seen, hoping that they notice and regret their choice. That's not empowerment. That is game playing in disguise. And then you'll see other coaches take on a softer line. Go work on yourself, become secure, and then your ex will come back. Yeah, sometimes this does happen. When you stop clinging, you do look more attractive. But here's the paradox. If you actually do the work and do become more secure, your ex often stops being attractive to you, as in you're not attracted to them, because you've grown. Often they haven't. And secure people don't chase those who stay stuck. They don't chase the emotionally unhealthy. That might be a blanket sweeping statement, but for the most part, it is true. So yes, there are many instances where people may get back together later on down the track and go on to have long-lasting, healthy relationships. But if you listen to the stories of these couples, there is usually a common thread. That is, both individuals recognized the shit that they needed to work on, and they did, and they reconnected as two new versions of themselves, who just so happened to be compatible as the new versions who they became. And often there is a significant amount of time that has played out in between the first relationship and the second relationship. The boomerangs that come back, very rarely does that manifest itself into a healthy relational dynamic. So the real harm of much of the predatory dating and relationship advice out there on the internet is it's harmful because it's selling you pseudo-control. It makes you believe that if you just follow their formula, go no contact, glow up, post the right things, say the right things if they lob a breadcrumb your way, you can control the outcome. But you can't. You don't control whether your ex grows. You don't control whether they choose you again. The only control that you do have over is yourself. That is your healing, your boundaries, your choices, your nervous system. That's real control, and that is the foundation of secure attachment. So what does secure attachment actually look like? Now, being secure does not mean that you're never triggered. It means you still can feel jealousy, you can feel fear or doubt, but you stay grounded. That is the key. Insecurity and losing that feeling of being grounded is where your survival center kicks into gear, and fear and insecurity are now behind the wheel. So being secure means you can process a situation or express your needs without exploding or shutting down. You can hold boundaries without guilt. And even if a relationship ends, you still know that you're whole. Your whole sense of self hasn't been obliterated with this. So when we talk about insecure attachment, it looks very different. And this is where attachment theory comes into play. So we can have our anxious attachers, we can have our avoidant attachers, and then we've got our subcategories of avoidant attachers where we've got our dismissive or fearful avoidance. So with activated anxious attachment, often this will look like things like clinging, chasing, over-explaining, and these people can just be terrified of rejection. And then we've got our dismissive avoidance, where this behaviour is often marked by withdrawing, minimising, and shutting people out to feel safe. Then we've got the fearful avoidant, lucky us. This is where we can swing between all of the above. We have a buffet of unhealthy, dysregulated behaviours that we can choose from. Well, we don't really get a choice. Our wounds and the situation will choose them for us. Okay, so dysregulated versus regulated. These terms are thrown around a heap, but what do they actually mean? This is where we need to understand that secure attachment isn't just a mindset. It is your nervous system in action. When you're regulated, your prefrontal cortex, so that's the part of our brain that governs logic, empathy, decision-making, it's online. Our ventral vagal system, that is a part of our brain that allows us to feel safe and social or behave in a safe and social state. That is active. We can think clearly, we can connect, and we can choose how we respond. But then, if we are dysregulated, our amygdala, which is our brain's alarm system, that survival part of our brain, it hijacks the show. Cortisol will flood our body, our heart races, our breathing shortens. We've also got some adrenaline and a few other neurochemicals floating around as well. But what happens is our prefrontal cortex, the one that is governing logic, empathy, and decision-making, that goes offline. So at this point, when the amygdalas come online, you're not choosing. Your survival brain is. Your fears, your wounds, your brain center that doesn't care about logic, empathy, or really rational decision making, that is what's running the show. It cares about survival. So when we're regulated, regulation is essentially, we can have the same input coming in. So someone may not have texted us back, and instead of catastrophizing and thinking, oh my God, the relationship's over, they're going to break up with me, and I'll just send them a barrage of texts because I just need to know that I'm safe, because it's safety that's often governing a lot of the dysregulated responses. The regulated response is more so like, okay, maybe, well, they haven't texted me back. Maybe they're busy. Yeah, I'll message them in an hour or two and see what's going on. So the difference between regulated and dysregulated behavior is regulation gives us pause to make a conscious choice, to connect with our emotions, to connect with our thoughts. This is where we're responding, not reacting. So again, regulation is the pause. The survival part of our brain is still waking up, so the trigger is still there. It wakes up a little bit. But before you hand the wheel over to it, you're able to be like, oh, no, that's okay. I don't need to text them. That's your trauma talking. That's fine. Now, people, if they don't have a history of trauma, they probably won't have that part of a conversation with their internal system. But if you have gone from overcoming an insecure attachment style, it is still often us talking down that dysregulated state. So again, the regulation, we learn what it is, and that is the pause. Okay, now let's have a look at how this sort of plays out in the breakup and get your ex back space. So when you can't let go of your ex, it is often not just a fear of abandonment. It's also things like self-worth wounds. If they left me, I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. Identity collapse. Without them, who am I? I gave everything to this relationship. Narrative loss, this is a huge one. The future I imagined is gone. The house that we were going to buy together, the holidays we were going to go on together, the family we were going to have, the whole future that we had painted in our head, it no longer exists. And then for many of us, old trauma. Our inner child wakes up and is begging for the repair that we never got. So when you're craving your ex, it's actually often you craving relief from these pre-existing wounds. You're not really craving your ex themselves. And that's why I'll often say you'll be over your ex before your trauma is. So you'll often reach a point where there's this cognitive dissonance coming into play. So on one hand, you may know that they weren't good for you. They didn't treat you well. But on the other hand, you kind of can get stuck in this thought loop, like, I'll give anything to get them back. Yes, it's an understandable thought, but that's your trauma talking. And it's also outsourcing regulation. So this is where many people get trapped. They'll say, I'll feel so much better if and when they come back. And yes, that's your nervous system calming down if they do, but that's not healthy regulation, that's relief. So if you haven't developed your own emotional regulation skills, it very much becomes dependency. Their absence, you feel like you're in free fall. Their return, it feels like rescue. And this is not stability. That is outsourcing your emotional regulation to someone else's presence. And it is setting the stage for repeating pain and reopening wounds over and over again. Now, I just want to pause and say you're not weak for wanting your ex back. Not at all. There were probably many lovable, endearing things about your ex, or maybe not, depending on who they are, but you cannot let the good outweigh the bad if it is to your physical and emotional detriment. That longing that you often have is your attachment system screaming. So understanding attachment theory isn't about hacks to pull your ex closer. It's about understanding your inner child screams that your attachment system is having so that you can soothe them without losing yourself seeking regulation from someone else who will just very likely reopen that wound. So when you stop chasing the pseudo-control that many of these relationship coaches flog on the internet, and you start using attachment theory for self-reconnection, everything will shift. Breakups stop being all-consuming. You stop outsourcing your worth. You choose better partners, and you finally create space for safe, lasting connection. Now, as cliche as it sounds, the real win is not getting them back. The real win is finding yourself and getting yourself back. Now, as always, I hope this episode resonated. If it did, please drop us a 5-star on Spotify or a like on YouTube. And if there's anyone you know who may benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Now, this episode does have a guided journaling session accompanying it where I focus on helping you build some self-awareness of yourself when you may be entering into a dysregulated state, how this may influence some of your thoughts and behaviors, and some guidance towards self-regulation. And these are available on the YouTube guided journaling playlist at the Reconnection Co. Take care, and I will see you next time.